People like you don't belong in a real neighborhood. Get your filthy animals off this land. Marlene Pruitt slammed her white Range Rover sideways across my cattle gate. Same spot, same time every morning for 3 weeks. Engine still running. Designer sunglasses on. Phone out filming me like I was the criminal. She slapped a fresh $500 a day fine under my wiper and smirked. Maybe now you'll finally learn your place. I didn't say a word. I just looked past her. At 40 head of cattle packed tight behind that gate, already restless, already smelling the open pasture she was blocking. She had no idea those animals were about to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. What would you have done in my boots? Drop your state in the comments. 2. Setup. 663-650. Let me back up 3 weeks, because none of this makes sense without a little history. My name's Walt Hutchins, 58 years old, 3rd generation on this land, and until 2 years ago, I ran this ranch with my wife, Dorothy, at my side. Now it's just me and my granddaughter, Josie, 16, sharp as a tack, and the only person in this county who can get a stubborn steer to load into a trailer without breaking a sweat. Dorothy's been gone 2 years. I still catch myself talking to her out in the barn some mornings, coffee in hand, the smell of diesel and manure hanging thick in the cold air like it always has. Some grief just settles into a place and stays there. This land has been Hutchins' land since my grandfather cleared it with a mule and a lot of stubbornness. Long before anybody paved a road out here. Long before Brookstone Meadows even existed. That subdivision went up 2 years ago, right after my old neighbor sold off his back 40. Nice enough houses if you like everything looking exactly the same. Marlene Pruitt moved in with the first wave of buyers and had herself elected HOA president inside of 6 months. I'll give her this much, she's efficient. She just aimed all that efficiency at the wrong target. Day one of all this, she was just parking on the fence line to assert the boundary, she said, like the county easement was some kind of shared front yard. I walked over, showed her my deed, figured that'd be the end of it. She laughed, actually laughed, and said something about how surveys can be wrong. They can't, not this one. But I didn't push it that first day. Figured she'd get bored soon enough. She didn't get bored. She got worse. Every morning after that same spot, same time, 6:15, like clockwork, blocking my cattle gate before I could even get the feed truck through. First it was just the car, then it was notes, then it was her standing there with her arms crossed, waiting for me like she was clocking in for a shift she'd assigned herself. I heard later secondhand that she'd told another board member my ranch was dragging down everybody's home values. Never mind that half of Brookstone Meadows only exists because my neighbor sold his land. Never mind that cattle were grazing this dirt before her subdivision had a name. The gravel crunch of her tires pulling in got to where I could hear it in my sleep. The low bawl of 40 head of cattle, hungry and waiting, on the other side of a gate they couldn't get through that got to where I could hear that too. 3 weeks of it. 3 weeks of hazard lights blinking at dawn of the HOA board sending letters about aesthetic corridors and community standards, of me biting my tongue because Dorothy always used to say a Hutchins doesn't lower himself to somebody else's level. Which brings us right back to that morning. The one you just saw. The fine notice under the wiper, the phone in my face. Maybe now you'll finally learn your place. I didn't say a word to her. I've told you that already. But I want you to understand what I was actually thinking standing there in the cold, watching her drive off in that Range Rover like she'd just won something. I wasn't thinking about lawyers, not yet. I was thinking about my cattle, about the route they walk every single morning to pasture, rain or shine, same as they have for 3 generations of Hutchins men before me. About how patient those animals are, how predictable, how gentle when you train them right, and how easy it is to teach a herd a brand new path if you've got a reason worth teaching it for. And about exactly where that new path was about to run. 2 days after that fine notice, Marlene tried something new. I woke up to the sound of a diesel engine that wasn't mine, low, throaty idling right at the end of my driveway. By the time I got my boots on and got outside, there was a flatbed tow truck backed up to my feed truck, hook already halfway under the bumper, and a kid who couldn't have been older than 25 standing there with a clipboard, like he was doing me a favor. "Sir, I've got a work order here. Vehicles parked on community right-of-way." I looked past him. Marlene was standing at the edge of her Range Rover, arms crossed, that same smirk from 2 mornings ago, like she'd already framed the photo of my truck getting hauled off in her mind. "Community right-of-way," I said. "You mean my driveway?" The kid shrugged, apologetic. "Ma'am, here says it's HOA property." Here's the thing about towing somebody's vehicle. Doesn't matter how official the clipboard looks or how confident the woman standing next to it sounds. Somebody's still gotta actually own the ground that truck is sitting on. And Marlene didn't own an inch of mine. I didn't argue with the kid. I called Ray. Deputy Ray Colton and I go back to high school. Different last names, same football team, same bad haircuts in 1986. He wasn't even on shift, just drinking coffee at his kitchen table when I called. But he drove over anyway, because that's the kind of friend he is. He didn't flash a badge. Didn't need to. He just asked to see the tow company's authorization. Then asked to see mine, my deed, folded up in the truck's glove box, where I've kept a copy since the day my father handed the place down to me. Ray read it over slow, the way he does everything, running a finger down the property description like he was double-checking his own memory of every acre out here. "This land's private," he finally said. "Has been for 60 years. Your work order's worthless here." The kid didn't need telling twice. He unhooked the truck faster than he'd hooked it, mumbled something about just doing what I was told, and pulled off down the road, leaving nothing behind but a puddle of diesel and a smell that hung in the cold air for a good 10 minutes after he'd gone. Marlene didn't say a word. For once. She just got back in her Range Rover, still parked square across my gate, mind you, tow truck or no tow truck, and drove off with her jaw set tight. Ray leaned against my fence, watching her taillights disappear around the bend. "You know," he said, "a private HOA can send all the tow orders it wants. Doesn't mean a thing if they don't actually own the property. Anybody can hire a truck, doesn't make it legal. Half the time these tow companies don't even check, they just want the fee." He shook his head, half laughing. "She's going to keep coming, Walt. You know that." "I do," I said. "Here's the takeaway, plain and simple. If someone ever tries to tow you off your own land, ask to see their authority before you ask to see their tow truck. A clipboard isn't a deed." I thanked Ray, and he waved it off like it was nothing, though we both knew it wasn't. 40 head of cattle were bawling behind that gate the whole time. Hungry, restless, not caring one bit about work orders or right-of-way disputes, just wanting their breakfast, same as every morning of their simple, uncomplicated lives. I almost envied them. That should have been the end of it. Any reasonable person would have taken the hint and found somewhere else to make a point. Marlene wasn't a reasonable person. She was a woman who'd just watched her plan fall apart in front of a sheriff's deputy, in front of her own neighbor's windows, no less. And people like that don't slink off quietly. They get creative. They dig for a new angle. 3 days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. County letterhead this time, not HOA. Marlene had gone over Ray's head entirely and filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, claiming my ranch was operating as an unpermitted commercial livestock facility inside a residential growth corridor. Never mind that this ranch predates that growth corridor by 3 generations. I read it twice at the kitchen table, same table where I'd find Dorothy's old easement folder years later, though I didn't know that yet. Josie read it over my shoulder and just shook her head, arms crossed, looking so much like her grandmother, it caught me off guard. "She's not going to stop, is she, Grandpa?" "No," I said. "But neither are we." Outside, the fog was starting to lift off the pasture, and somewhere past the gate, 40 cattle were waiting on their breakfast, patient as ever, right on schedule, same as they'd be tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and every morning until the one that finally mattered. 785-800, the Jongsai So, plus or minus 5% fo. Escalation loop 2. 785-800. The zoning complaint fizzled out inside a week. Turns out ranches predating a subdivision get grandfathered in. A fact the county inspector explained to Marlene, with the patient tone you'd use on a toddler. I figured that'd sting enough to slow her down. It didn't. It just changed her strategy. I found out from Odessa Kane, of all people, who called me up one evening while I was hosing down the barn. "Walt," she said, "you seen the Brookstone Meadows Facebook group lately?" I hadn't. I don't do much of that. But Josie pulled it up on her phone at the kitchen table, and there it was. A video 14 seconds long, cropped tight. Me, standing at my own gate. My cattle visible in the background, shifting the way cattle always shift. And underneath it, in Marlene's own words, "This is what our children are exposed to every single morning. Loose, aggressive livestock feet from the cul-de-sac. How long before someone gets hurt?" 200 comments deep already. Half of them from people who'd never once set foot on my land, arguing about property values like they had any idea what they were talking about. The footage was from that same morning. She filmed me, the one with the fine notice, the one you already saw. Except she'd cut it right at the moment my cattle bunched up near the gate. Made it look like they were surging, crowding, dangerous. Left out the part where they were just waiting on breakfast, same as always. Left out her own Range Rover, too, sitting square across the gate that whole time. Josie was furious in a quiet, focused way that reminded me a lot of her grandmother. "That's not even what happened, Grandpa. She cut it to make it look like something else entirely." "I know it," I said. "Question is what we do about it." She had an answer before I finished asking. "Trail camera. For my 4-H record book, I'm supposed to be documenting herd behavior for my project anyway. Nobody can say a thing about me putting a camera on our own fence line." She wasn't wrong. It's our property, our fence, our camera, no different than a doorbell camera pointed at your own porch. Doesn't take anybody's permission, and it doesn't lie the way a cropped video clip can. The takeaway, if you're taking notes, you don't need anyone's consent to document your own property. A $10 trail camera can out-argue a whole comment section, because unlike people cameras, don't leave out the parts that don't fit the story. We mounted it that same evening, tucked up in the crook of a fence post, where the morning light wouldn't wash it out. Josie fussing over the angle for a good 20 minutes, while I held the ladder and tried not to laugh at how seriously she was taking it. The little metal housing clicked shut with a sound like a door latch settling into place, small and final, the kind of sound that means business. 3 mornings later, we had our answer. 5:50 a.m. Still dark, just the first gray edge of dawn coming up over the ridge. And there, on 8-second clips, time-stamped and dated plain as day, Marlene Pruitt, alone letting herself onto my property through the side gate, the one that leads straight to the small holding pen where I keep a couple of yearlings separate from the main herd. She fiddled with the latch for almost a full minute, glancing over her shoulder twice, popped it loose, looked around once more, quick-like. She was checking for witnesses she was sure didn't exist, then walked back to her car and drove off into the dark. The very next morning, 2 of those yearlings were loose near the road, and Marlene had somehow already gotten there, first phone out, filming, breathless, with manufactured outrage. Josie watched the footage twice, then looked at me with an expression somewhere between fury and disbelief. "She staged it. She actually staged the whole thing and then told everyone it was your fault." "Looks that way," I said. "I didn't post it anywhere. Didn't need to, not yet. I just made a copy, tucked it away, and started keeping a folder of my own. Right next to Dorothy's old paperwork, though. I still didn't know then how much I'd need both of them before this was over." Out past the fence, the cattle were already moving toward the gate, on their own patient and unbothered right, on their morning schedule. The same schedule Marlene had spent 3 weeks trying to interrupt, and the same schedule that before long was going to interrupt her right back. Nếu được mình chuyển sang segment 5, escalation loop thay 100 by 5 escalation loop thay 100. I figured the fake loose cattle stunt would be Marlene's last card. It wasn't even close. The next Tuesday, a white pickup with county markings pulled up my drive, and out stepped a code enforcement officer named Deacon Price. Tired, eyes clipboard, even thicker than the tow drivers had been, the kind of man who spent 20 years getting sent out on complaints that waste everybody's time. He introduced himself apologetic before he'd even said what he was there for. "Got a formal request for a compliance inspection, Mr. Hutchins. Full walk-through fencing, waste management water, runoff, the works." "Who filed it?" He checked the paper, though I already knew the answer before he said it. "Brookstone Meadows HOA, signed by the board president." I walked him through the whole place myself, barn holding pens, the runoff ditch my grandfather dug by hand before I was even born. The manure management setup that's been inspected and approved more times than I can count over 30 years of ranching. Deacon took his notes, tapped his boot against fence posts, checked drainage the way inspectors do, unhurried, thorough, not the least bit interested in cutting me a break or making trouble either way. Just doing the job, same as always, same as he probably did on 100 other properties that year. By the time we finished, the fog had burned off entirely, and the sun was warm enough that I'd traded my jacket for just a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the smell of warm dust replacing the morning chill. Everything's clean, Mr. Hutchins. Better than clean, honestly. Most operations half this size aren't half this tidy. He clicked his pen shut, tucked his clipboard under his arm, and paused a second before getting back in his truck. Can I ask you something? This is the 4th complaint filed against this address this year. Zoning code enforcement, animal control, and now us again. That's unusual. Most addresses in this county I see once every couple years, if that. 4th? I repeated. 4th, he said. All from the same board president, best I can tell. He didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. He just shook my hand, wished me a good afternoon, and drove off down the same gravel road Marlene's Range Rover idled on every single morning, tires kicking up a little cloud of dust that hung there long after his taillights disappeared. I sat with that number for a while. 4 complaints. 4 different departments. 4 different angles all aimed at the same 60 acres. That evening I called Odessa. Kane told her what Deacon had said. She went quiet on the other end of the line for a second, the particular kind of quiet a reporter goes when she's already 3 steps ahead of you. 4 complaints against 1 address in under a month, she said slowly. That's not neighborly disagreement, Walt. That's a pattern, and patterns get written down somewhere, whether people mean them to or not. Here's the takeaway. Worth remembering, petty harassment leaves a paper trail, same as anything else. Every complaint filed, every inspection requested, every letterhead used. It all gets logged somewhere, with a date on it. And once there's enough of a pattern, that paper trail starts telling its own story, no matter how confident the person behind it feels. Odessa didn't stop at the complaints. She started pulling HOA board meeting minutes, public record, technically, though most residents never bother reading them. Took her 3 days of digging through dry, boring financial disclosures nobody reads twice, the kind of paperwork that puts most people to sleep by page 2, buried in a filing cabinet at the county clerk's office. Nobody visits unless they have to. She called me back on a Thursday night, and I could hear the sound of her flipping through paper on the other end. Walt, I don't know if this means anything yet, but Brookstone Meadows has run 2 years of special capital assessments. Extra fees on top of regular dues. $200 a household both years. That's over $60,000 total. And there's no line item anywhere in these minutes saying what it actually paid for. $60,000, I said. $60,000, she repeated. That somebody's going to have to explain eventually. And presidents who push that many complaints against 1 address usually aren't the kind of people who like explaining things. I looked out the kitchen window while she talked past the porch light out toward the pasture where the herd was bedded down for the night. Quiet shapes in the dark, hooves shuffling softly against packed dirt, utterly unaware that a woman 200 yards away was about to have a much worse year than any of them. Sang Segment 6, Midpoint Reveal. 600% Midpoint Reveal. I called Sal Ferreira the next morning. Figured if Marlene wanted to argue about boundaries so badly, we might as well settle the question for good. Get a proper survey done, stake the actual line, take the guesswork out of it entirely. Sal's been the county surveyor for going on 15 years, methodical as they come. The kind of man who measures twice out of habit, even when he's already measured 3 times that week. He spent the better part of a Saturday out there, with his equipment, running lines, checking old plat records against the new ones, muttering numbers to himself the way surveyors do. Around noon, he waved me over, frowning at a stack of papers he'd pulled from the county archive that morning. The pages soft and yellowed at the edges. Walt, you know this strip along your fence line, the one she keeps parking on? I know it well by now. It's not just yours by ownership. He tapped the document twice. There's a recorded easement on it. Access easement, permanent running with the land. Filed the same year Brookstone Meadows broke ground. I leaned over his shoulder to look. And there, in the fine print of a document I'd never once seen in 15 years of paying property taxes on this place, was a name I knew better than my own. Dorothy J. Hutchins Grantee. Sal explained it plain the way he explains everything. When the old Peterson place sold off its back acreage to the developer Dorothy, who'd handled most of our legal paperwork, same as she'd handled most everything worth doing right, had negotiated a permanent access easement across that exact strip, guaranteed right of passage for cattle drives forever, no matter who owned the land on either side of it. She must have done it quietly, without making a fuss the way she did most things that mattered. She'd been gone 2 years, and she was still protecting this ranch. I sat down right there in the grass, which isn't something a 58-year-old rancher does easily or without a good reason, and Sal had the decency to busy himself with his equipment and give me a minute. That evening, I went digging through Dorothy's old filing cabinet, the one I hadn't touched much since she passed, mostly out of a mix of grief and not knowing where anything was anymore. Found the folder eventually, tucked behind old tax records, her handwriting still on the tab, in that neat, no-nonsense cursive of hers. Easement Peterson sale. Inside was the original agreement signed and notarized, dated a full 8 months before Brookstone Meadows ever broke ground. She'd thought of this before the subdivision even existed, before Marlene Pruitt had ever set foot in the county, let alone parked a single tire on land that wasn't hers to touch. Here's the takeaway worth sitting with. A recorded easement doesn't care who buys the land afterward. It runs with the property forever, binding every future owner, HOA boards included, even ones that didn't exist yet when the easement was signed. It's one of those quiet legal tools most people never think about until the day they desperately need it. An easement is a promise the land itself remembers, even when the people living on it have forgotten, or never knew in the first place. I sat at that kitchen table a long while, coffee gone cold in my hands, looking at Dorothy's handwriting like it was a letter she'd written just for this moment. Marlene had no idea what she'd been parking on top of every single morning for 3 weeks straight. Neodocumenting segment 7, planning montage, 800 through 800 cha 800 through by. Planning montage 813 800. I didn't call a lawyer the next morning. I called Ray and Odessa, and then I walked out to the barn and found Josie already up mucking stalls before school, and told her to sit down for a minute because I had an idea. I could sue her, I said. Easement's ironclad. Lawyer would have her fined and served papers inside a month. Josie leaned on her pitchfork waiting for the butt. But nobody in this county would ever see it. She'd settle quiet pay a fine nobody hears about, and 3 months from now she'd be telling folks at the grocery store how unreasonable that rancher next door is. I shook my head. Your grandmother always said the best lesson is the one that teaches itself in front of witnesses. Josie grinned slowly, the same grin Dorothy used to get right before she talked me into something. You want to walk the herd through the picnic. I want to walk the herd through the picnic. Brookstone Meadows throws an annual community picnic every year. String lights, folding tables, Marlene at the podium giving some speech about shared values. Half the county attends, mostly for the free hot dogs. And it happens to fall this year, right around the corner, on that exact strip of land Marlene parks on every single morning. Ray signed on first off duty, just to keep things civil, though I suspected he was mostly looking forward to the show. Odessa signed on next, practically giddy about it, already planning where her photographer would stand for the best angle. The 4-H kids didn't need convincing at all. Josie had them recruited inside a day. Half a dozen teenagers who take showing cattle about as seriously as some folks take their day jobs, arguing for a solid 20 minutes over which of the yearlings was most photogenic, for what they were already calling with zero irony, the walk. Here's the part that actually mattered though, the legal spine of the whole plan. The easement gave us the right to drive cattle across that strip anytime we needed to. But rights don't mean much if you can't prove you exercise them properly. So Ray helped me draft a formal notice, and I filed it with the HOA board a full 48 hours before the picnic, in writing stating plainly that a cattle drive would cross the easement strip that morning per the recorded rights on file. The takeaway there is simple, and it's saved more people trouble than almost any other trick in the book. Give formal written notice before you exercise a legal right, and you take away anybody's ability to claim they were ambushed later. Do it by the book, and the book becomes your best witness in front of everyone. I mailed a copy to every board member, certified mail tracking number and all, Marlene included. Ray even suggested I get a second copy notarized, just so nobody can pretend it got lost in the mail. Good advice, and cheap insurance against a woman who'd already proven she'd bend a story to fit her needs. The week leading up to it, the barn turned into something between a rehearsal hall and a family reunion. Josie and the kids spent evenings polishing halters until the leather practically glowed under the barn lights, running the yearlings through slow, patient practice walks along the fence line, teaching them the exact path, step by step, the same unhurried rhythm cattle fall into when nothing's rushing them. The smell of saddle soap and hoof oil hung thick in the barn those nights, mixed with the buttery smell of popcorn from whatever movie the kids had going on somebody's laptop between chores. Sal stopped by twice that week too, double-checking his stakes along the easement line, making sure there'd be no argument about exactly where the boundary sat once the day came. "Measure twice," he said, grinning. "Walk once." 2 days before the picnic, Josie showed me her phone, laughing so hard she could barely hold it steady. Marlene had posted in the HOA group again, furious apparently after receiving our certified notice. "There will be no livestock anywhere near this picnic. I will personally stand in front of any cattle that show up. This is a family event, not a farm." I read it twice. Then I smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. "She just put it in writing," I said. Josie looked at me, catching on fast, that same sharp look Dorothy used to get. "She's going to be standing right where the notice says we're walking through." She sure is. Out past the porch light, the herd was settling in for the night, calm as ever, cud-chewing and unbothered, utterly unaware that in 2 days' time they were about to become the most talked-about cattle in Coldwater Ridge history. Nếu được mình chuyển sang segment 8, escalation loop formidable từ 658 cho 200, từ trong sai số bất nung miến 5% ngưỡng dưới là 760 sát biên chấp nhận được. Escalation loop 4, 758 cho 800. Marlene didn't take the certified notice well. That much became obvious fast. Her first move was trying to get the picnic itself moved. Different weekend, different location, anything to avoid the exact spot our notice named. She brought it up at an emergency board meeting Odessa happened to be sitting in on for community coverage, and pushed hard for a venue change, citing unforeseen scheduling conflicts she couldn't quite name out loud when pressed. The board voted her down 4-1. Turns out the picnic pavilion's been booked a year in advance since Brookstone Meadows started, and nobody on that board was eager to reschedule 100 families' calendars over something Marlene wouldn't explain clearly. Undeterred, she tried the county next filed for a last-minute noise permit denial, arguing that livestock vocalization during a residential event violated county ordinance. I found out about that one from Deacon Price himself, who called me chuckling. "Mr. Hutchins, I've been doing this job 20 years, and I've never once had to research whether a cow mooing counts as a noise violation." It doesn't, for the record. The county denied her request inside 48 hours, citing existing agricultural exemptions that predate the ordinance by a decade. So she pivoted again, started telling anyone who'd listen at the mailbox at the community pool. In whispered conversations Josie's friends overheard, and reported back with the gleeful accuracy only teenagers manage, that my cattle were a lawsuit waiting to happen, that someone's child was going to get trampled, that she'd tried everything reasonable and I'd left her no choice but to protect the neighborhood herself. I heard about most of it secondhand. I didn't respond to any of it directly. Instead, I kept doing the quiet, unglamorous work that actually mattered more than any argument at a mailbox ever could. I called my insurance agent, confirmed my liability coverage was current, which it already was, same as it's been every year since I started ranching, since any operation this size carries it as a matter of course, long before Marlene ever showed up. I got a letter from the agent stating as much, dated and signed, and slid it into the folder. I made copies of the recorded easement, plain, legible copies, no editorializing, and mailed one to every single board member, along with a short, polite note thanking them for their time and reminding them the cattle drive notice remained on file exactly as filed. I didn't argue with anybody. I just built a stack of paper an inch thick, every page, dated, every claim documented, sitting quiet in a folder on my kitchen table, next to Dorothy's old one, growing a little thicker every evening. Evenings that week, we kept running practice walks at dusk, the light going gold and long across the pasture, the sound of 40 sets of hooves against packed dirt rolling low and steady, like a drum somewhere far off, patient and unhurried. Exactly the rhythm we wanted them holding on to for the real thing. Josie walked point every time, calling out gentle corrections, the kids trailing alongside like they'd been doing it their whole lives, instead of 3 weeks. The air smelled like cut hay and cooling earth, that particular evening smell. That means the day's work is winding down. Ray stopped by one evening to watch, leaning on the fence with his hat pushed back. "She's telling people you're dangerous," he said. "Word's getting around." "Let it get around," I said. "Won't matter much longer." He nodded slow, watching the herd move past unbothered and unhurried. "You know, for what it's worth, insurance on file, documented, right-of-way, 48 hours written notice. Ain't a jury in this state gonna call that reckless. She's got nothing left but noise." That's the takeaway if you want one solid insurance and a documented legal right sitting together in the same folder do more to shut down a smear campaign than any argument ever could. You can't outshout a paper trail. Sooner or later the shouting just runs out of air and the paper's still sitting there unmoved, same as it always was, same as it'll be next week and the week after. 2 days out. The herd was ready. The paperwork was ready. Even the weather forecast had cooperated, clear skies, mild for the season, not a cloud to blame anything on. Marlene, as far as I could tell, had run out of moves entirely. Everything but the one thing she'd already promised in writing to do herself. Nếu được mình chuyển sang segment 9, escalation loop 5, 800 tụm bộ. Segment 9, xong 770.200. Giờ viết tiếp segment 10 và 11. Segment 10, xong 737.800, hơi dưới ngưỡng 5%, nhưng chấp nhận được vì đây là đoạn climax, cần nhịp nhân dồn dập không nên độn thêm. Giờ viết segment 11. Đủ cả 3 phần đã kiểm tra số từ chính xác bằng công cụ 9, escalation loop 5770.800. The day before the picnic, Marlene showed up at my place unannounced. No Range Rover blocking the gate this time. She parked politely off to the side, which should have told me right away something had shifted. She found me in the barn checking tact, and stood in the doorway a long moment before she spoke, arms uncrossed for once, voice pitched low instead of loud. "I want to talk, just the two of us, no board, no cameras." I set down the halter I was working on and waited, letting the silence sit there until she filled it herself, the smell of leather and oil hanging between us. "I'll give you $40,000, she said, "for a voluntary release on that strip along the fence line. Cash, off the record. You sign a quiet waiver. I fence it off before tomorrow, and this whole thing just goes away." $40,000. For a piece of land that already belonged to my family, protected by an easement she still didn't know existed, offered quietly enough that nobody else would ever hear about the fact she'd offered it at all. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either, not right away. I just asked her to repeat the number, and she did a little louder this time, a little more confident, like she thought I was warming up to it. Here's a detail worth knowing, and I want to be careful how I say it. Recording a conversation you're a part of is legal in plenty of states, mine included, without needing the other person's permission. I'm not going to walk you through how to do it, and I'd tell you to check your own state's laws before you ever try. But I knew mine, and my phone was already sitting on the workbench, screen dark, doing exactly what I needed it to do. She left about 10 minutes later, satisfied, apparently, that she'd made me an offer I'd think hard about overnight, that particular, self-satisfied set to her shoulders as she walked back to her car. I called Odessa the second her taillights cleared the driveway. "She what?" Odessa said, flat the way she gets when a story just landed in her lap, fully formed. $40,000, cash, off the record, wants a quiet signature before tomorrow. There was a pause. Then the particular sound of a reporter grabbing a notepad. "Walt, that's not just embarrassing for her. If that money's coming from HOA funds, and given what we already know about those special assessments, that's the kind of thing that gets people more than embarrassed." I sat on my porch a good while after that call, coffee gone cold again, same as it had a habit of doing lately. Somewhere out past the fence, the herd was settling in for the night, same as always, cud chewing, patient, blissfully unaware that a woman had just tried to buy her way out of a lesson she was about to get anyway. The next morning, Josie found me at the kitchen table and asked if Marlene had actually thought that would work. I think, I said, she's run out of angles that don't involve money. And she's about to run out of that too. By early afternoon, word came back through Ray. Marlene, apparently rattled by something, had posted one more time in the HOA group, doubling down harder than ever. I will be there tomorrow, and I will stand my ground. This ends with me, not with some rancher's cattle. Josie read it out loud, laughing so hard she had to sit down on the porch steps. She's really going to stand right there, she said. In the exact spot, on camera, in front of the whole neighborhood. Looks that way, I said. That evening we ran one final practice walk, quieter than the others, everybody a little more focused than usual. The golden light draining slow out of the sky while the herd moved through the motions one more time, calm and unhurried, exactly as they'd been taught. Josie walked the front of the line without a word needed, and the kids fell in behind like it was second nature by now. Ray stopped by after leaning on the fence rail, watching the last of the light fade. Tomorrow's going to be something, he said. It sure is, I said. Out past the porch light, 40 cattle shifted in the dark afterward, restless with the particular kind of energy animals get the night before something changes. Like they already knew tomorrow wasn't going to be an ordinary morning. 10. Public climax 7:37 800. Picnic day arrived, clear and warm, exactly as the forecast promised. By 10 a.m., the community pavilion was already strung with lights nobody would need until dark. Folding tables groaning under potato salad and store-bought lemonade. Kids chasing each other between the sprinklers, while their parents traded gossip in lawn chairs. Marlene took the podium a little before noon, microphone in hand, launching into her usual speech about community standards and the values that make Brookstone Meadows special. I stood near the back with Josie Ray a few yards off in plainclothes Odessa, and her photographer positioned near the refreshment table, with a clear line of sight down the easement strip. At exactly 12:15, right on schedule, the gate at the far end of the pavilion swung open. Josie led first, calm as anything, 40 head of cattle falling in behind her, in that same unhurried rhythm we drilled all week. Hooves against packed dirt, a low, steady drumbeat rolling across the grass dust, rising soft and gold in the noon light. The kids walked alongside, easy and confident, like this was just another Tuesday chore instead of the most watched cattle drive in county history. The crowd went quiet, then murmured, then started reaching for their phones the way crowds always do the second something worth filming starts happening. Marlene saw them coming and didn't hesitate. She stepped off the podium, walked straight into the easement strip, and planted herself directly in the herd's path. Arms crossed, chin up, exactly the pose she'd promised the internet she'd strike. "I told you," she called out loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. "I will not allow—" Ray stepped forward before she finished the sentence, holding up a folded copy of the notice, voice calm and carrying easily across the suddenly silent pavilion. "Ma'am, this strip is a recorded easement, filed years before your subdivision existed. Formal written notice of this cattle drive was delivered to the HOA board 48 hours ago, per the terms of that easement. You're currently standing on private access land you have no legal right to obstruct." You could have heard a hoofbeat drop. Marlene opened her mouth, 'cause it looked at the herd still coming steady and unbothered toward her cattle. Don't stop for speeches, and nobody had trained them to, and took one step back, then another. Then she was clear of the strip entirely, standing in the grass at the edge of her own picnic, watching 40 cattle walk calmly past exactly where she'd stood 10 seconds earlier. Odessa's photographer caught the whole thing. The stepping back, the look on her face, the herd's total magnificent indifference to the woman who'd spent 3 weeks making Walt Hutchins's mornings miserable. The murmurs in the crowd shifted fast from confusion to something else entirely, a few people laughing outright, a few already asking each other pointed questions about special assessments they'd apparently been hearing whispers about all week thanks to Odessa's quiet groundwork ahead of time. One neighbor, a woman I'd only ever nodded to in passing, called out toward the podium, "Marlene, what happened to that $60,000? Another voice picked it up almost immediately. "And what's this about 40,000 cash, Marlene?" Word travels fast in a small county, especially once a reporter's been quietly asking the right questions all week. Marlene didn't answer either one. She just stood there in the grass, sunglasses pushed up on her head, watching cowbells clank softly past in the golden afternoon light, utterly, completely out of moves, out of excuses, out of anywhere left to stand. The last of the herd ambled by unbothered. A couple of the yearlings pausing just long enough to sniff curiously at the potato salad table before Josie clicked her tongue and moved them along, drawing a fresh round of laughter from the crowd that had, until about 90 seconds earlier, been Marlene's captive audience. By the time the herd cleared the pavilion and Josie swung the far gate shut behind the last steer, the whole crowd had turned their attention away from the cattle entirely and toward the woman standing alone in the grass sunlight, catching the dust still settling around her. No clipboard, no folder, nothing left to hide behind. Marlene Pruitt had already become the answer to a question this whole county was about to spend the next month asking out loud. 65-700. It didn't take long after that. Within a week, residents were demanding a full financial audit of the HOA's books. The same residents, mostly, who'd spent 2 years paying those special capital assessments without asking a single question. Turns out the audit didn't take much digging. $60,000 in unexplained fees, traced back almost embarrassingly cleanly to a full landscaping overhaul at one particular house on Magnolia Court. New irrigation system, imported stone, a gazebo nobody had ever voted on. Marlene resigned from the board before the audit report even finished printing. She sold the house 6 weeks later. I heard she moved 2 counties over, though I can't say I went looking to confirm it, and I didn't much care to. The $40,000 for what it's worth never got paid. Wasn't hers to offer in the first place, and once the audit started, everybody in that HOA suddenly had a lot of questions about where cash like that was supposed to come from anyway. As for the easement strip, the one she'd parked on every single morning for 3 weeks, the one that ended up settling this whole thing in front of a couple hundred witnesses, Josie and I talked it over and decided it deserved a better future than just being a fence line people argued about. We donated it as a permanent walking trail open to the whole community, connecting the ranch straight through to the subdivision. Sal helped us survey the new path proper. We put up a small wooden sign at the trailhead, nothing fancy, just her name and the year's Dorothy Hutchins Greenway. Funny thing about a small county, people remember who stood where. These days, neighbors who used to avoid my fence line entirely walk that trail most evenings. Dogs on leashes, kids on bikes, waving at the cattle like old friends instead of a lawsuit waiting to happen. The smell of cut grass and honeysuckle drifts along that path most summer nights now, a far cry from the diesel and hazard lights it used to carry. The 4-H chapter partnered with the new HOA board this spring to launch something bigger too, the first annual Coldwater Ridge Harvest Festival. Proceeds going straight into a scholarship fund for a graduating 4-H senior heading into agricultural college. Josie's already got a seat on the committee, youngest member they've ever had, and about as proud of that as I've ever seen her, though she'd never admit it out loud. The picnic's still an annual thing. Bigger now, if anything. And yes, the cattle still make an appearance every year right on schedule, right down that same easement strip, though these days it's less of an ambush and more of a parade. Kids run alongside asking to pet them. Somebody always brings a camera on purpose now instead of using one to lie. I think about Dorothy a lot when I walk that trail. About how she protected this place years before she ever knew it would need protecting, quiet and thorough the way she did everything worth doing. I like to think she'd have gotten a real kick out of watching Marlene take that step backward. Ray still brings it up sometimes over coffee, shaking his head and grinning. Best 48 hours notice I ever read out loud, he says. Odessa ended up winning a regional press award for the HOA finance story, which she reminds me of exactly as often as you'd expect a friend to. We've got another story queued up for next time, by the way, an HOA 2 towns over that tried to fine a beekeeper for noise pollution. You'll want to see how that one ends too. Yeah. I keep coming back to that 48-hour notice. Just paper. Sitting in a mailbox on Marlene's desk for 2 days before anybody ever walked a single cow. Walt didn't yell at that picnic. Didn't have to. You know, I've watched a lot of these HOA situations play out over the years, and it's rarely the loud guy who wins. It's the one who already knew where his lines were before the other side ever drew theirs. Makes you wonder how many of these boards are just betting nobody's going to check the paperwork. I don't know. Maybe that's the part that sticks with me most. Anyway, if you've dealt with something like this yourself, I'd actually like to hear it. Drop it below. What happened, how it ended, whatever. If this one landed for you, hit like, maybe subscribe if you're not already. We've got more of these coming. Different neighborhood, different HOA, same kind of story, if you know what I mean. All right, that's it for this one.